Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League Season 3.
Hello and welcome to Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League Season 3, a platform where influential leaders come together to examine the ideas shaping India's economic and institutional future. Today's conversation centers on India's next phase of growth, competitive manufacturing, greater participation of women in leadership, and family businesses anchored in strong governance and succession. Joining us today is Ms. Mallika Srinivasan, Chairman and Managing Director of TAFE, one of India's most respected manufacturing leaders. Under her stewardship, TAFE has emerged as a global force in farm mechanization, combining scale, innovation, and a strong commitment to inclusive and sustainable growth. Her perspective offers a rare view into how Indian manufacturing can compete globally while remaining deeply rooted in national priorities. Alongside her is Mr. Cyril Shroff, Managing Partner at Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas, a leading voice in corporate law and governance. Through his work with businesses, boards, and policymakers, he has played a pivotal role in shaping the legal and governance frameworks that underpin India's economic transformation. Together, they explore how India can strengthen its manufacturing base, expand women's participation in the workforce and leadership, and ensure that family enterprises evolve with strong governance, clear succession, and enduring values. Mr. Srinivasan, Mr. Shroff, as always, thank you very much for being part of this program. Let's kick this off. And I want to sort of start, Mr. Srinivasan, with you. At a recent interview, you spoke about precision agriculture, automation, AI, and IoT as key to the future of farming, and TAFE targeting around 2 lakh tractors annually with strong export growth. I mean, if you had to write a so-called manufacturing manifesto for India 2030, from your vantage point of farm equipment, what would be your 3 non-negotiables on policy, infrastructure, and talent, ma'am?
We are the world's largest market for tractors, and in this segment is the largest volume segment in the world as well. Our products and our technology, we have demonstrated quality and innovation at an international scale. And so we generally believe that we have an opportunity for a global play. The first, I think it was Asian players, including us from India, who formed the first wave of disruption in our industry. And the next and most imminent wave of disruption is coming from precision ag, automation, precision ag tech. So if you talk about the policy in this context, I think the one policy initiative that we would expect would be for support of innovation, support of R&D. And I'll give an example. We were at a show, the world's largest show for farm equipment was Agritechnica, that was recently held. And all the startups there, you see, they had funding from the EU. EU-funded, EU-backed startups. And of course, we know what it is with China. And with the EV advantage that China has, we expect that tech advantage to spill over into other areas as well. So I think that is the first policy initiative. The second, in terms of infrastructure that you referred to, would be for our own agriculture, for our agri sector to benefit, would be the availability and offering of very accurate positioning services, pre-positioning services. This is the whole foundation on which automation rests. And with all its benefits, what we have today in the country, which is offered by the Survey of India, it doesn't have quite the required level of accuracy and discharge. And financing support, of course, would be another policy initiative that one could touch upon, perhaps shifting the emphasis from the support that we receive today for mechanization to a support for new ag tech solutions for small farmers of our country. And finally, I think in terms of talent, I think our focus needs to be, so far it has been on agronomy. We'd like to see a shift from that to agronomy with technology.
That's very, very comprehensive, very, very well laid out in that sense, ma'am. Mr. Shroff, what do you see as the biggest legal or regulatory sort of bottleneck to manufacturing and making in India?
So let me build upon what Mallika ji has said and add to it a kind of a layer of policy and regulation. I think for investment to happen and growth to happen, capital needs to feel secure, whether it's Indian capital or foreign capital. And so long as it doesn't feel secure, you always have this struggle of underinvestment. So when does capital feel secure? I think it feels secure when there is regulatory certainty, there is certainty of contract enforcement and dispute resolution, and there are clear sectoral policies. And India has changed from the time when everything was relationship based and whose telephone number you have on speed dial to now, which is a much more rule based system. And the rules need to be clear, because what is worse is neither being relationship nor rule based, and somewhere in the middle with gray rules as well. So clarity of rules, I think, is the most important thing. And India has now changed, evolved a lot from being a rule taker of what happens in the West. We are now rule makers. India has a lot of self-respect in terms of its policy making agenda and what it does, and you've seen that across many sectors. So I think there is a great opportunity for Indian rule making to become clearer, and which will facilitate how capital feels secure and businesses are finally commercial enterprise needs to be profitable.
Mr. Srinivasan, if I can come to you, I mean, TAFE, as I said earlier as well, I mean, is built for global markets, right? I mean, it's moved away from India's India first kind of approach. What are the 2 or 3 most critical policy or structural changes India needs to implement to make its manufacturing sector consistently competitive on the global stage, especially in high tech and value added areas?
I know much has been said about the ease of doing business, and I think Shroff also perhaps alluded to that in his comment. But I'll talk on just 2 other points, perhaps. One is, if you look at our cost structure, it is in the larger ecosystem, a critical point has been traditionally, we've been talking about our infrastructure cost in manufacturing. Our costs have been high. But this is one area where I think we have good tidings. We've seen some very good progress in this area. Government has invested very significantly in the infrastructure sector. With our road network has grown very fast. Our investment in the railways is perhaps 9 times what it was a decade ago. We've seen many more airports and metros come up. So all of this, we see a significant impact in terms of a heartening trend. And we are expecting logistics expenses to come to a more competitive 9% of GDP. But what we still find a little short is our warehousing in terms of the infrastructure, warehousing availability. If you look last year, I think the demand was greater than, the supply was very short. We had 1:1.4:1 in terms of demand is to supply. And our PPP models with respect to developing infrastructure have also had only very limited success, maybe because of the risk sharing and also due to access to financing for the private sector. So we still have some concerns in that area, but we're making some really good progress. But the one area that I think I would like to touch upon, which completely corporates can do, is the need for investing in R&D. Be globally competitive, and you mentioned high-tech areas, and I include both traditional areas as well as high-tech areas. To be there, it is surely India's decade. The coming decade is surely India's one. But for us to make those strides in line with our national ambitions, R&D becomes a very important area. Undoubtedly, our R&D has almost doubled over the last decade to 1.27 crores. But most of the R&D is restricted to the public sector. Only 35% of our R&D is coming from the private sector, much lower than what you see in other innovative innovation-led economies, be it the US or China. So therefore, I think whether it's traditional industry or you're going for new sectors in biotech or advanced manufacturing or AI, the creation of IP is going to be most critical for our growth.
On that note, we'll take a quick commercial break. When we return, Mallika Srinivasan and Cyril Shroff will continue this conversation looking at leadership, governance, and the future of Indian enterprise.
Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League Season 3. Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League Season 3.
Welcome back. You're watching Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League Season 3. We're in conversation with Mallika Srinivasan and Cyril Shroff discussing how India can build competitive manufacturing, unlock women's leadership potential, and strengthen family businesses through values-led governance. Mr. Srinivasan, and Mr. Shroff, let's move on to one other element which doesn't get discussed as often, but I think is an important element when we talk about how to increase productivity, output, etc. in India. I mean, more manufacturing here in India, which is, of course, female participation in the workforce. Ms. Srinivasan, you've been passionate about this. At IIM Lucknow, you contrasted India's roughly 35% female workforce participation with 73% in Kenya, 61% in China, over 50% in Malaysia and Indonesia, and pointed out how few women still make it to CEO and board chair roles in India, here in India. Now, if we wanted to move that 35% meaningfully upwards in the next 10 years, what are the social transformations required to increase the pipeline of women in the workforce and to make sure that the pipeline is not leaky and women make it to the top?
Now, can I start with a good example? Because just to illustrate the point, I think Tamil Nadu, and I'm proud of our home state, Tamil Nadu is really leading the pack when it comes to women's participation in the workforce. We have the largest, I think, over 43% of women in manufacturing are in the country are in Tamil Nadu. So we have very high enrollment rates in education, etc. But this is not just a coincidence, because it is for decades of inclusive policies, inclusion, and consciously building that social mindset and that social consciousness. And I'm glad you used the word social transformation. And I think it's actually indeed social transformation. Even states like Tamil Nadu are going with very iconic programs now. And let's see, there's a new recently launched program called the Tamil Nadu We Safe. And how it attacks this issue, despite being ahead of other states, is to look at it very holistically. It is to look at it from all angles. It's multi-sectoral, it's multi-organizational, government, private, NGOs, all coming together. And it's backed by World Bank funding against targeted outcomes. Covers everything. Covers from safety to childcare to supporting entrepreneurship to building a social consciousness to building awareness. I think it needs to be the social transformation is at the heart of the problem. And while we have a lot of discussion around what are the root causes, if you really look at the root causes, it can be because the decision makers, most women need someone else to take a decision about whether they can work. And while people understand the importance for women to work, most people prefer that they take a part-time or a small business or a part-time role or a small business, and very few use childcare. So I think there is a social transformation that needs to start at home with equal access to resources, from nutrition to education to finance, and then go through into our education system where it is not just taught but demonstrated. And the concept of workload sharing, for example, needs to become a social norm. It's going to be a slow progress, but perhaps it will take us a generation to make a complete transformation, but we need to start.
No, absolutely. And so important, that some of what you said does take place and happen. Mr. Shroff, you've been closely involved with corporate governance reforms and discussions on gender diverse boards in the country, including the push for women directors and better governance scorecards. Why are we still stuck in are we stuck in the tick box mode on gender? And what would a genuinely outcomes focused governance framework for women's participation look like? I mean, if you could sort of give us the example from law firms and the legal world, including your own firm, sir.
I think firstly, we have to recognize that gender equity is an economic issue and not just a social issue. I think you need to sort of play at both levels. And outcomes actually start improving only when you treat it with that level of seriousness as an economic issue as well. So I think the IMF has commented that if there was even a 50-50 workforce between male and female, India's GDP would increase by almost 36% and global GDP would increase by about 25% from what its levels are. So it is not insignificant at all. And it cuts across different sectors, different industries. Law firms you mentioned, they have traditionally been quite gender inclusive. You take my own firm, we're over 60% women, including at senior leadership level as well. And I think it's It's almost the opposite of what we see around us. And it has worked very well for us. And this is a movement that is happening actually starting from law colleges and universities as well, where the graduate class that comes out is to start with itself, very female heavy, and then they continue. I think the interesting thing also is that in modern law firm careers, it is possible to continue the journey through, and not just after 4 or 5 years there is a tendency of a drastic fall that has not yet happened, and that is one of the reasons why even in our firm we have seen this do very well. Now, speaking of corporate governance on a more India Inc. kind of perspective, I think the problem is that it is still seen as a bit of a tick the box. And I think the problem starts with how promoter families quite often are structured. There are progressive families where women are treated equally and have equal opportunity. One of them is kind of on the screen with us just now. But on a more general basis, I think the fact is that successful women are sometimes seen as an exception. It should in fact be treated as a norm. And I think the way in which this issue should be leadership issue should be approached should be gender neutral, the best person for the job, because you should realize that businesses are essentially capitalist structures, whereas families are more socialist structures. It is important that in a capitalist vocabulary, that the best person for the job should win. So therefore, in families itself, where 70% of corporate India is still founder run and for the promoter families, I think the change needs to start there. And when you start seeing the change emanate from there, you will see it flowing into mainstream India Inc. as well, particularly in older businesses. So I think that it's a more complex issue, which impacts families, it impacts succession, and it impacts really how modern India is to be built.
That's well put, Mr. Shroff. Ms. Srinivasan, let's move on to one other topic, one other issue, which I think our viewers would love to hear from you. This is family businesses, the question of succession, and really values-based governance, which many of the old family sort of led businesses have displayed, like yours. You know, you've often said that ethics, quality, and human values are the bedrock of TAFE's culture, and that values form the core of a successful work environment. Mr. Shroff has often argued that India's corporate governance must reflect Indian values and family realities, and not just imported, sort of, to use that word again, checklists. Where do you see Indian family businesses getting this values governance balance right, and where can we improve?
I think values drives the governance. So if you can instill values and imbibe them, and then they dictate a kind of behavior pattern, and everyone knows what's acceptable. I agree. A large percentage of India's businesses are family-owned, promoter-led businesses, and therefore the succession planning models, the governance related to succession planning models, cannot be a cut and paste from Western models, and we'll have to evolve them for ourselves. But nevertheless, that having been said, articulation of governance standards and adherence to these with a strict audit as well is certainly important and protects the investors. Where can we improve? I think once we need to look at the governance need, the family leadership needs to take these principles, internalize it completely, and make sure that the reverse also happens, that the governance that you want to see is put into and institutionalized into the value system of the company. We can perhaps do better on that.
Mr. Srinivasan, you've sort of publicly backed robust succession planning and spoken of grooming Dr. Lakshmi Venu into the leadership at TAFE. But this is a broader question, but your perspective is important here. What needs to change broadly, as you see in Indian sort of industry and other groups, in shareholding structures, role design, family governance, if we want to see more women from promoter families to be serious contenders for CEO, and not just sort of shareholders and other roles for the CEO position? What needs to change, ma'am?
I think if you want family women in the family, and if they're ambitious and they want to be in the business, I think the journey needs to start fairly early on in their lives. It starts with education and equipping them with the necessary skill sets that will give them a good chance for success. That having been said, I think every family is different, the culture is different, the business is different. So, as you plan your succession, one needs to think carefully with respect to how do you bring them into the business? Where can they add value? What is the individual's personal strengths and weaknesses? And I think what we should do, perhaps we don't do well enough, is a formal system of periodic review, interaction, feedback, because that hones perceptions, that hones expectations, and makes the whole journey smoother. And you can put down a development goal and take it forward. I know it's this. You would think that I'm saying something that's very similar to what we would do with a professionally run company or a combination of professional and family company. And why would it be different for a family member? It is different because it needs to be more sensitive. There are also a lot of family dynamics that come into play. And therefore, this requires a little bit more nurturing and careful handling.
Well put, ma'am. Mr. Shroff, you've had a sort of ringside view to many of these things across many large business families. You've sort of been involved in drafting family constitutions, succession frameworks. You've written about power structures inside family businesses. I mean, so same question to you, sir. What needs to change in this regard?
I think two things. Firstly, succession is not an event, it's a multi-decade journey. I think you have to recognize that it is actually a whole process that has to be carefully navigated, and actually you have to run the process very carefully. That's point number one. Secondly, I think probably because of the hierarchical structure of families, not enough open conversations take place. I think the manner in which you handle the complex succession of a family-run business is that there needs to be a lot of open conversations, and it is ideally done at a time when the kind of patriarch or matriarch are in charge. It is a very difficult conversation later on when it is a conversation amongst peers rather than in a kind of a conversation where there is a kind of a senior voice that is involved. It is just from a technicality point of view, it's not a the toolkit is fairly simple. It's the manner in which you handle the sensitivities about it, the fairness and the transparency that is brought to it that makes the difference between a successful succession and an unsuccessful one.
Brilliantly put, Mr. Shroff. So much to talk about, but I think such an insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope our viewers did as well. That's all for this edition of the Thought League. A big thank you to you, ma'am, Mallika Srinivasan, and of course, Cyril Shroff, for sharing your insights on manufacturing, women's leadership, and the governance frameworks that will shape India's economic future. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV18.
Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas presents CNBC TV18, The Thought League Season 3.